So as you all might notice, I have this nifty new polo thing going on here, and I'm not sure if I like it yet or not. And I'm sure several of you are going to talk about the non-bow with the beanie and the polo. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but I like the beanie, you know, so leave me alone. But today, we got something cool going on. We have a little shardless Sultai action. So I've had most of the cards for this online for quite a while. It certainly helped that there was a lot of overlap between Abzan in Modern and this deck in Legacy, and VMA certainly helped a lot too. Got me a stock of dual lands, Force of Wills, and I had some Jaces, but then sold them and then bought World Wake ones because they were 2 cents cheaper for whatever reason, and you know, you got to go with the original printing, right? So the big thing that happened was that Tempest Remastered was announced, and Wastelands were like 110, so I was like borrowing those whenever I wanted them, but now they just dropped to like 60 or whatever, so I bought those. And yeah, I'm sure they'll go down a lot more once the set comes out, but they were so cheap, I had to buy them. And now I can play Shardless again. So, we're going to run through a daily event. I would say real quick, but that's probably not going to be true. It's probably going to take a while, because this deck is a little slow and ponderous. But this is probably one of my favorite decks of all time. It does basically exactly what I want to be doing in Magic, which is drawing a bunch of cards, killing all of your opponent's threats, and you have some counterspells as well, and then you just have this end game that is very powerful, especially in the context of Legacy, where not a lot of people have end games. So they have things like Delver of Secrets and Stifle and Wasteland. They're just trying to kill you really quick. Same thing with like all the combo decks. And then, of course, there are like actual control decks like Miracles, but this deck generally has like the biggest end game of any of the fair blue decks, which is pretty nice, and that's right where I want to be. So I've written several articles on this subject, so if you're interested in this deck, feel free to check those out. But with Treasure Cruise getting banned somewhat recently, I believe that the format is more or less back to where it was before, so this deck is probably going to be quite good again. I just haven't seen it pop up all that often, and it's time to bring it back, you know? So let me give you a little history lesson, I guess. So the original version was a triple Jace deck. It had 3 Jaces. That was one of the best end games. You were very good at defending Jace with Shardless Agent, Baleful Strix, and Tarmogoyf. And then True Name Nemesis got printed. Jace got a little bit worse, but like Shardless was still good. And you just ended up having to play some things in your board to actually kill True Name Nemesis because it was pretty tough to kill it, even with things like Liliana. So then that happened, then Treasure Cruise happened, and then this deck, like, you know, it was trying to Ancestral to get the card advantage for the late game, and Treasure Cruise just kind of invalidated that because your late game no longer competed with their, like, turn 4 Ancestral basically every game. So this deck got a lot worse and was probably pretty close to unplayable. I know some people, like James Wynn, still did quite well with it, despite Cruise being legal, but now that Cruise is gone, I think this deck is just as good as it was before. We now have access to Dig Through Time as well, which I think we can play 1 or 2 Delve cards rather safely. The issue is that we have things like Tarmogoyf and Deathrite Shaman, both of which use our graveyard, so Dig Through Time is probably not as good here as it would be in, say, like any other blue deck ever, but it is still quite good, and this deck always had a slight problem with is blue card count for Force of Will, because you want Deathrite Shaman, Tarmogoyf, Abrupt Decay, Liliana, and then some amount of discard. And that just meant that you didn't have a ton of blue cards for Force of Will. So I would generally play like 3 Force of Wills with 18, but we have 21 blue cards now, so I'm playing the full 4 Force of Wills. And that might mean that I should go back to 4 Ancestrals, but I like 3 right now, especially with 2 Digs, and I added a second Jace. The other night I played in a Legacy Daily event and I started out 2-0 and then I finished 2-2, and what happened was, you know, one of the games I mulliganed down to 0 or whatever because my 6, 5, 4, and 3 card hands all had no land, so that was pretty unfortunate. I didn't really get to play Magic there, but and then what else did I lose to? I lost to a Delver deck with Gurmake, Angler, and Dig Through Time and Young Pyromancer. He was a pretty interesting one, but it's a deck that people play online. So That matchup was pretty close too, but I figured out kind of what I had to do to change my deck and make it a little bit better. And I think the second Jace helps a lot because one of the matches I lost to was Miracles. I went 1-1, and both matches were really tough. But I remember that matchup being really good when I had 3 Jaces. And then when you have 1 or 0 Jaces, suddenly that matchup is not great anymore. And I like the second Jace. I added the second Tar Pit as well as a 23rd land. And some people play 22 land and 2 Tar Pits. I don't think that's right because you have Wasteland and Tar Pits, which are both pretty awkward to draw. So by having these as extra lands, you'll have the normal draws that you would have with a 22 land deck, except you'll have like an extra Tar Pit, and that's fine. And like since you have an extra land, you can figure out like where on your curve you want to play it. So it's like one of the best ways to build your mana base in such a way where you get to play all the ETB tap lands you want, but it doesn't mess up your curve. It's just like you just add extra lands basically. And this deck could certainly play a 23rd land normally. 22 is kind of greedy. I was generally playing like 22 with a Ponder, and I don't know. Now I'm trying out the basics. I have a Forest and a Swamp, and I'm not sure if I like these yet or not, but I did play against 2 Blood Moon decks also, and they're pretty reasonable. So same thing with the Tar Pits and the Wastelands. Like if you're going to have an awkward mana draw because of some of the lands that you're playing in your deck, you add an extra land, and like suddenly those problems are less bad, you know? Like if you draw like Swamp Wasteland or Tropical Swamp Wasteland or something, that's generally pretty bad because, you know, I'm not playing things like Hymn to Torok main deck, but I used to. But you could have like Liliana the Veil, for example, that you just wouldn't be able to cast, or Jason the Mind Sculptor. And now, if we have an extra land in our draw like a Tar Pit, you know, now all our stuff's turned on. So 23 land, I think. Plus, one of the only ways this deck can lose to things like Delver is if they stifle and wasteland you. That should be their primary game plan because they can't beat like this stuff, all this stuff. So their best bet is to mana screw you and hope that you don't get to start casting Shardless Agents and whatnot. So by playing an extra land, you kind of mitigate that a decent amount. And I think that's about it. I'm a little light on discard and high on counter Magic just because I think the Magic Online metagame is a little more combo oriented, and that might be true in real life as well. Storm has been popping up a lot, and I haven't played with these versions all that much, so I definitely want to try it. And with things like Miracles out there, I kind of want Force of Will both to protect my Jace and to stop their Jaces from resolving. So I'm on the full 4. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. I'm leaning towards not, but definitely want to try it out. And then sideboard's kind of wonky right now. One of the cards I really like is Arcane Laboratory. I had a second one, but I added a Notion Thief instead. And the reason these cards are there is mainly for Mono Blue Omnitel, which is a pretty tough matchup because they have a ton of cantrips, a lot of fast mana, and then a lot of counterspells. They have like Flusterstorm and whatnot. And they can also Cunning Wish for Pact of Negation to force their stuff through. So Show and Tell, oh, they also have Defense Grid afterboard, but Show and Tell might just resolve against you, and there's not a whole lot you can do. But by playing things like Notion Thief and Arcane Lab, they can't enter the Infinite you. So if they have to go like Show and Tell, put in Omni, you put in Arcane Lab, they pass the turn, and you have something like a Maelstrom Pulse or a discard spell to get their enter out of their hand, for example, then you're in pretty good shape. So I like those. Plus Notion Thief is good against Miracles, you know, to some degree. It's not insane or anything, but it's definitely worth playing, definitely worth boarding in. So I want to try one of those. We have a couple Chills, which are kind of there just for burn. Pretty bad matchup, but also Blue-Red Delver is still kind of a thing on Magic Online, and if you get to delay things like Pyroblast, Young Pyromancer, Sulfuric Vortex, Price of Progress, those sorts of cards, like then you actually have a shot. And you know, I say like you have a shot, like you have a much better shot than you did, because I don't think the matchups are super bad or anything. Like most matchups with this deck are pretty close. So a couple Disfigures for early creature decks, things like Delver, Goblin Guide, whatnot, opposing Deathrite Shamans. A couple Hymn to Toroks, I like these against combo decks, and matchups that are about attrition, but the games don't go super long, because when the games go long and you start top-decking discard spells, it's pretty bad. I have a Knight of Souls Betrayal and a Golgari Charm, both for Elves and True Name Nemesis, and both of those are pretty nice. Golgari Charm also kills things like Leyline of Sanctity and Omniscience if they have to pass the turn, or if they cast Enter and you charm their thing in response, that's also not bad. I have a Maelstrom Pulse, which I actually kind of wanted main deck, but This is like a slower, clunkier version of Shardless that I'm used to playing, because I have an extra Jace, I have an extra Force, I have these dig-through times that are kind of slow, and I would generally err on more discard or having a Disfigure main, something like that. And I wanted the Pulse in there, but I didn't want another clunky card. So, Pulse is just good against random permanents. It will often be able to kill a Batterskull. It's the best card probably against Jace the Mind Sculptor. And yeah, just a lot of random business out there that you want to be killing. So against Miracles, we have a Pithing Needle to stop their tops and a Null Rod to stop their tops. I like both of these. Normally, you would want to actually Force of Will their tops, just because it gives them such great card selection going into the mid and late game, and it kind of invalidates things like Liliana of the Veil, which is otherwise pretty backbreaking against them. So you want things to stop their top and make it so you don't actually have to Force of Will them. And Null Rod is also a permanent-based hate card against Storm, similar to Arcane Laboratory, so I like having those as well. And then we have a pair of Nihil Spell Bombs, and this is just generally the catch-all against random graveyard decks, although also quite good against Snapcaster and sometimes opposing Deathrite Shaman decks. So, definitely good against Nimble Mongoose as well, forgot to mention that. But not a ton of Teamer Delver out there. So, yeah, I think I've talked about the things that I'm a little apprehensive about in this list, where the top is a little heavy, and I wouldn't mind a Disfigure main deck, I wouldn't mind another discard spell, and I wouldn't mind more Baleful Strixes somewhere in the deck, because they're very, very good against Delver and Tarmogoyf, plus they're a blue card, and between Charlotte Sage and Baleful Strix, you have a lot of good ways to attack Planeswalkers, which I like a lot, so... other than that, I mean, I have some issues, and I'm going to have to work through them, but I like this deck a lot, so this should be a lot of fun.